Life can change in the blink of an eye. For a bright and talented high school student, that change came on a gloomy October evening when the roads were slick with rain. She was driving home from volleyball practice just like any other day, thinking about the upcoming championship game and the geometry homework waiting for her at home. The windshield wipers swept back and forth, fighting against the steady downpour. She had made this drive countless times before, but tonight was different. As she approached the curve near Miller's Bridge, her phone buzzed with a message from her mom asking about dinner. That single moment of distraction would alter the course of her life forever. The car hit a patch of water, and suddenly, everything seemed to move in slow motion. She felt the steering wheel become loose in her hands as the vehicle hydroplaned across the wet asphalt. Her heart pounded in her chest as she desperately tried to regain control, but the car had a mind of its own. Time seemed to stretch like rubber as the guardrail approached. The impact came with a deafening crash of metal against metal. The airbag deployed in a flash of white, and the world started spinning. Through the chaos, she caught glimpses of rain, trees, and sky all blending together in a dizzying kaleidoscope. The last thing she remembered was the sound of breaking glass and the strange, peaceful thought that the raindrops on her windshield looked like falling stars. Minutes later, other drivers spotted the wreckage and called for help. The emergency response team arrived quickly, their sirens cutting through the rainy night like red and blue lightning. They'd found her unconscious but breathing, trapped in the crumpled remains of her once pristine car. The paramedics worked with practiced efficiency, carefully extracting her from the wreckage while stabilizing her neck and spine. In the ambulance, racing toward Memorial General Hospital, the paramedics noticed something unusual. Despite being unconscious, she would occasionally move her fingers as if trying to grasp something that wasn't there. One of the senior paramedics had seen thousands of accident victims over his 20-year career, but something about this case felt different. The hospital emergency room burst into action as soon as the ambulance doors opened. Doctors and nurses swarmed around her, calling out vital signs and medical terms that would later become all too familiar to her family. The initial scans revealed severe head trauma, and the medical team knew they were in a race against time. Her parents arrived at the hospital just minutes after she did, their faces pale with worry. The sight of their daughter lying motionless on the hospital bed surrounded by beeping machines and tubes was almost too much to bear. Her mother grabbed her hand, whispering words of encouragement, while her father stood quietly by the window, watching the same rain that had caused the accident continue to fall. The next few hours were crucial. Surgeons worked tirelessly to reduce the swelling in her brain, while nurses monitored every slight change in her condition. The hospital corridor became a place of anxious waiting, hushed conversations, and prayers whispered in the dark hours of the night. As dawn broke over the city, casting long shadows through the hospital windows, the doctors delivered the news: she had slipped into a coma. While her condition was stable, they couldn't predict when or if she would wake up. The human brain, they explained, was still largely a mystery, and each coma case was unique. What no one in that hospital room could have known was that this was just the beginning of an extraordinary story. While her physical body lay still, her consciousness was about to embark on a journey that would challenge everything the medical community thought they knew about coma patients. But for now, the only sound was the steady beep of the heart monitor and the gentle whisper of the ventilator, keeping rhythm with the rain that continued to fall outside. The steady rhythm of hospital machines became the soundtrack of their lives. 3 months felt like 3 lifetimes as the family watched their beloved daughter and sister lie motionless in the hospital bed. The room, once stark and unfamiliar, had slowly transformed into a makeshift home, with family photos taped to the walls and a comfortable armchair permanently stationed by the bedside. Her mother, a high school teacher, had taken leave from work. She spent her days talking to her daughter, brushing her hair and moisturizing her skin, all the while watching for any sign of movement, any flicker of consciousness. She would read aloud from her daughter's diary, found in the recovered backpack from the accident, hoping the familiar words might spark something in her sleeping mind. "Remember the time you won the regional volleyball championship?" she would say, holding her daughter's hand. "You jumped so high for that final point, everyone in the gym thought you were flying." The doctors had encouraged them to speak to her, explaining that coma patients might still be able to hear and process information, even if they couldn't respond. Her father handled the situation differently. A usually stoic man who worked as an accountant, he now spent hours researching coma recovery cases on his laptop, reaching out to specialists across the country, and maintaining a detailed spreadsheet of every slight change in her condition. The nurses would often find him pacing the corridors late at night, coffee in hand, muttering medical terms he'd learned from his research. Her younger sister took on the role of family historian, documenting everything in a journal she kept by the bedside. "The doctors adjusted your medication today," she would write. "Mom thinks your cover looked better, and Dad found a new research paper about coma patients responding to music." Every day after school, she would sit next to her sister and share stories about classroom drama, funny moments with friends, and how the volleyball team had dedicated their season to their missing star player. The medical staff became like extended family. The night nurse would bring in fresh flowers every Monday, claiming they were leftover from another ward, though everyone knew she bought them herself. The respiratory therapist would tell jokes during his sessions, insisting that laughter was the best medicine, even for those who couldn't laugh back. The cleaning staff member who worked the morning shift would hum gentle melodies as she worked, creating a peaceful atmosphere for the new day. As weeks turned into months, the doctors remained cautiously optimistic but honest about the uncertainties. Brain scans showed unusual activity patterns that none of them could quite explain. During certain times of the day, particularly around sunset, the monitors would show spikes in brain activity that seemed almost like responses to unseen stimuli. The medical team documented everything meticulously, though they were careful not to raise false hopes. The family fell into a routine, taking shifts so someone was always by her side. They celebrated her birthday in the hospital room, bringing in her favorite chocolate cake and singing quietly. They decorated for Christmas, stringing twinkle lights around the window and placing a small tree on the bedside table. They refused to let life's moments pass unmarked, even if their daughter couldn't actively participate. Support poured in from unexpected places. Her volleyball teammates visited regularly, bringing their positive energy and updates from school. Teachers sent cards and care packages. Even strangers who had heard about the accident through local news coverage sent letters of encouragement. The hospital wall gradually filled with cards, artwork, and messages of hope from people touched by her story. But it was during the quiet moments that the weight of waiting felt heaviest. In the still hours of early morning, when the hospital corridors were silent except for the distant squeak of nurses' shoes, her mother would sometimes find herself watching the rise and fall of her daughter's chest, remembering the energetic girl who used to bound through their front door after practice, full of stories and laughter. As the third month drew to a close, something began to change. It started with small things, slight movements of her fingers, changes in her breathing pattern, more frequent spikes in brain activity. The medical team noticed these changes but remained cautiously reserved in their assessments. They'd seen similar patterns before that didn't lead to awakening. What they didn't know was that beneath the surface of unconsciousness, an extraordinary journey was taking place. While her body remained still, her mind was preparing to share a story that would challenge everything they thought they knew about consciousness, awareness, and the mysteries of the human mind. But for now, they continued their vigil, holding on to hope and waiting for the moment when she would finally open her eyes. Something strange was happening in room 317 of Memorial General Hospital. It started during the 13th week of the young athlete's coma, when the evening shift nurse noticed an unusual pattern on the brain activity monitors. At first, she thought it might be a mechanical glitch. After all, equipment can sometimes act up during the quiet hours. But after triple-checking the connections and calling in maintenance to verify, she realized this was something entirely different. The lead neurologist, a doctor with salt and pepper hair who'd spent 30 years studying the human brain, found himself puzzled by what he was seeing. Every day, as the sun began to set and golden light filtered through the hospital windows, the patient's brain activity would spike dramatically. The patterns weren't random. They looked almost like the brain waves of someone who was actively processing information, thinking, perhaps even dreaming. In all my years of practice, he told his colleagues during their weekly review, "I've never seen anything quite like this." He spread the readings across the conference table, pointing to the regular patterns that appeared each evening. "It's as if her brain is more awake during sunset than some of my conscious patients." The medical team began documenting everything meticulously. They set up additional monitoring equipment and started tracking every slight change in her condition. Young medical residents would stop by during their rounds, drawn by the mysterious case that was beginning to create a buzz throughout the hospital. Even experienced doctors found themselves watching the monitors with newfound fascination, wondering what secrets lay hidden in those mysterious spikes and valleys of brain activity. One particularly observant nurse made an interesting connection. She noticed that the brain activity seemed to intensify whenever family members were sharing personal stories or when familiar music played in the room. During one memorable evening, when the patient's mother was reading from her old diary, the monitors lit up like a Christmas tree. The pattern suggested not just random neural firing, but actual information processing, as if she was listening, understanding, and responding in her own way. The father, still dedicated to his research, began correlating these patterns with different activities in the room. He created detailed spreadsheets noting the time of day, who was present, what was being discussed, and how the brain activity responded. His methodical approach helped the medical team identify even more patterns they might have otherwise missed. Weather seemed to play a role too. On stormy days, particularly when thunder rolled across the sky, her brain waves would show distinct reactions. The neurologist wondered if perhaps the sound triggered memories of the rainy night of her accident. But there was something else about these patterns. They didn't look like stress responses. Instead, they resembled the brain activity of someone deep in thought or memory. The younger sister, who had continued her daily visits and updates, swore she could sometimes feel her sister's presence more strongly during these active periods. "It's like she's right here with us," she would say, not just physically, but mentally too. The medical staff, though trained to remain objective, couldn't help but notice that the machines often seemed to support this intuition. As word of the unusual case spread through medical circles, specialists from other hospitals began reaching out. They sent their own data from similar cases, but none quite matched the consistent and intricate patterns they were seeing. Some suggested new theories about consciousness during coma states, while others proposed experimental treatments based on the timing of these active periods. The family found renewed hope in these developments. They began timing their visits to coincide with the periods of heightened brain activity, turning these sessions into intimate family moments. They'd share memories, play her favorite songs, and talk about future plans, all while watching the monitors dance with activity, as if she was participating in her own unique way. One evening, as the sun painted the hospital room in shades of orange and pink, something extraordinary happened. The usual sunset spike in brain activity began, but this time it was different, stronger, more organized, almost purposeful. The nurse on duty called in the neurologist immediately. As they watched the patterns unfold on the screen, they'd felt like they were witnessing something unprecedented in medical science. What they didn't realize was that these patterns were just the beginning. They were about to witness something that would challenge everything they thought they knew about consciousness, comas, and the incredible the family found renewed hope in these developments. They began timing their visits to coincide with the periods of heightened brain activity, turning these sessions into intimate family moments. They'd share memories, play her favorite songs, and talk about future plans, all while watching the monitors dance with activity as if she was participating in her own unique way. One evening, as the sun painted the hospital room in shades of orange and pink, something extraordinary happened. The usual sunset spike in brain activity began, but this time it was different, stronger, more organized, almost purposeful. The nurse on duty called in the neurologist immediately. As they watched the patterns unfold on the screen, they felt like they were witnessing something unprecedented in medical science. What they didn't realize was that these patterns were just the beginning. They were about to witness something that would challenge everything they thought they knew about consciousness, comas, and the incredible capabilities of the human mind. But for now, they continued to watch and wait, documenting every blip and wave on the monitors, knowing they were witnessing something remarkable, but not yet understanding just how remarkable it would turn out to be abilities of the human mind. But for now, they continued to watch and wait, documenting every blip and wave on the monitors, knowing they were witnessing something remarkable, but not yet understanding just how remarkable it would turn out to be. The morning started like any other at Memorial General Hospital. The first rays of sunlight were just beginning to peek through the window blinds of room 317, and the night shift nurse was finishing her final rounds. The patient's father had dozed off in the familiar armchair, his research papers scattered across his lap, while her mother had gone home for a quick shower and change of clothes. Nobody expected this ordinary Sunday morning to become one of the most extraordinary moments in medical history. It started with a twitch so slight that the nurse almost missed it. Then came a flutter of eyelids that seemed different from the random movements they'd seen before. The nurse moved closer, hardly daring to breathe. Years of experience had taught her not to get too excited about small changes, but something felt different this time. That's when it happened. The young girl's eyes opened. Not the vacant, unfocused gaze they sometimes saw in coma patients, but clear, alert eyes that immediately began scanning the room. The nurse pressed the emergency call button, her hands shaking with excitement. Within moments, the room filled with medical staff, their Sunday morning routine forgotten in the rush of activity. The father jolted awake, his papers falling to the floor unnoticed. "Sweetheart," he whispered, afraid to believe what he was seeing. His daughter's eyes found his, and then something happened that left everyone in the room speechless. She smiled. But what came next would shake the foundations of everything they thought they knew about consciousness and coma states. She began to speak, her voice hoarse from months of disuse, but her words clear and deliberate. "The cards are in the wrong order," she said, pointing to the get well cards on her wall. The one from the volleyball team came before the Christmas card from Aunt Linda. The room fell silent. How could she possibly know that? As the medical team ran their initial tests, she continued to surprise them. She named nurses who had cared for her during her coma, described conversations that had happened while she was unconscious, and even recalled specific medical procedures, details she should have had no way of knowing. "The night nurse with the red hair, she brings fresh flowers every Monday," she said. "And the cleaning lady who hums, she has such a beautiful voice. She was singing Amazing Grace last Thursday morning." The neurologist arrived, his Sunday morning coffee still in hand, and began asking her questions. Her responses were not only clear and coherent, but showed a level of awareness that seemed impossible for someone who had just emerged from a 3-month coma. "You changed my medication 3 weeks ago," she told him. "You were worried about the pressure in my brain, so you adjusted the dosage during the afternoon meeting. You were wearing a blue tie with small white dots that day." The doctor nearly dropped his coffee cup. She was right about everything. But how? Her father frantically flipped through his notes, confirming each detail she mentioned. Her mother arrived just then, dropping her purse in shock at the sight of her daughter not only awake but engaged in conversation. The tears flowed freely as they embraced for the first time in 3 months. But the young girl wasn't finished with her revelations. She described being aware throughout her entire coma, but not in the way anyone would have expected. She talked about experiencing something that defied conventional medical understanding, a state of consciousness that existed somewhere between sleeping and waking. "I could hear everything," she explained, her voice growing stronger. "But it was more than that. It was like I was floating above my body, watching everything happen. I could see the doctors during their rounds, watch the nurses change shifts, and follow my family as they moved around the room. The medical staff exchanged glances, their scientific training struggling to reconcile with what they were hearing. The neurologist began taking detailed notes, realizing they were witnessing something unprecedented in medical literature. She described the sunset phenomena that had puzzled them for weeks. "That's when everything became clearest," she said. "It was like the fading light helped me focus, helped me stay connected to what was happening around me." As the day progressed, more doctors arrived to witness this remarkable awakening. Each one left the room shaking their head in amazement. They had all heard stories of coma patients having varying levels of awareness, but nothing like this, nothing this detailed, this coherent, this challenging to everything they thought they knew about consciousness. What they didn't realize was that this awakening was just the beginning. The young girl's experiences during her coma would lead to discoveries that would change the way medical science understood consciousness, pushing the boundaries of what they thought was possible. But for now, in that sunlit hospital room, a family was whole again, and a medical miracle was unfolding one remarkable revelation at a time. In the days following her remarkable awakening, The young girl's hospital room transformed from a place of quiet waiting to a hub of intense activity. Doctors, researchers, and specialists came from all over, drawn by the extraordinary story of a patient who could recall everything that happened during her 3-month coma. But nobody was prepared for the full depth of what she had experienced. "It's like I was living in two worlds at once," she explained to the lead neurologist during one of their many conversations. The sunlight streamed through the window as she sat up in bed, her strength returning a little more each day. "I could see my body lying here, but I was also somehow everywhere in the room." She described her experience with remarkable clarity, using simple words to explain something that defied simple explanation. "At first it was scary," she admitted, twisting the edge of her blanket as she spoke. "I could see everyone, hear everything, but couldn't move or speak. I watched my mom brush my hair every morning, heard my dad reading medical papers late at night, felt my sister hold my hand, but I couldn't tell them I was there." The medical team listened intently as she described what they now called covert consciousness, a state where she was fully aware but unable to respond. She could recall specific conversations between doctors in the hallway, details of late-night nurse shift changes, and even the maintenance worker who fixed the squeaky door hinge at 3 a.m. one Tuesday morning. "The strangest part," she continued, her eyes distant with the memory, "was that I could sometimes float up near the ceiling. From there, I could see everything: the monitors, the medicine bottles on the shelf, the cards on the wall, even the tops of people's heads." She described details that would have been impossible to see from her bed, like the pattern on top of the ceiling fan or the content of papers left on high shelves. Her father, ever the methodical researcher, had been documenting everything. He brought out his laptop, showing how her descriptions matched his detailed notes of daily events. "Look at this," he said, pointing to his screen. She just described a conversation between two doctors that happened at 2:15 a.m. on a night when nobody else was in the room. How could she know that unless she was somehow aware? The younger sister, who had kept her journal faithfully throughout the coma, found her own writings confirmed in unexpected ways. "Remember when I told you about failing that history test?" she asked her sister. "You just described exactly how I was sitting in that chair, crying, even though your eyes were closed and you were in a coma." The mother, who had spent countless hours talking to her unconscious daughter, wiped tears from her eyes as her daughter recounted those conversations word for word. "I heard every story, every prayer, every song you sang," she told her mom. "Even when you thought I couldn't hear you, I was right there with you." But it wasn't all just about memories and conversations. She described experiencing something deeper, a profound connection to consciousness itself. During those months of physical stillness, her mind had been anything but quiet. She spoke of experiencing time differently, of understanding things about awareness and existence that she struggled to put into words. "The sunset times were special," she explained, her face lighting up. "It was like the changing light helped me focus better, made everything clearer. I could feel my thoughts becoming stronger, more organized. That's why the brain monitors always showed more activity then. I was trying so hard to reach out, to let everyone know I was still here." The medical staff found themselves facing a phenomenon that challenged everything they thought they knew about consciousness. Her descriptions were too detailed, too accurate to be dismissed as dreams or hallucinations. The neurologist spent hours reviewing her accounts, comparing them with hospital records and staff reports, finding match after match. "There's something else," she said one afternoon, her voice growing quiet. "During those 3 months, I learned something important about life and consciousness. It's not as simple as being awake or asleep, alive or not. There's something in between, something we don't understand yet." Her revelation sparked intense interest in the medical community. Researchers began developing new theories about consciousness during coma states. They started looking at brain activity patterns differently, wondering how many other patients might be experiencing similar awareness without any way to communicate it. The implications were enormous. If one patient could experience this level of awareness during a coma, how many others might be having similar experiences? How should hospitals change their approach to coma patient care? What did this mean for our understanding of consciousness itself? As the young girl continued to recover and share her experiences, one thing became clear. Her story wasn't just about surviving a coma. It was about discovering something profound about human consciousness, about the connection between mind and body, and about the mysteries that still lay hidden within the human brain. The investigation into the young patient's claims turned Memorial General Hospital into a hub of intense scientific activity. The lead neurologist's office became command central, its walls covered with charts, brain scan readings, and timeline maps. Coffee cups littered every surface as medical professionals worked long hours, driven by the possibility that they were on the verge of a breakthrough in understanding human consciousness. "We need to verify everything," the lead neurologist told his team during their first planning meeting. "Every conversation she remembers, every detail she describes, we need to find proof that these things actually happened." His usually neat desk was buried under stacks of hospital records, security logs, and staff reports. The investigation started with the simple things. They checked security footage to confirm the maintenance worker really did fix the squeaky door hinge at 3 a.m. that Tuesday. They verified the exact pattern on top of the ceiling fan she described. These small details proved true time and time again, but the team knew they needed more. The night shift nurses dug through their old notes, confirming specific conversations she had overheard during the quietest hours. "I remember that night," one nurse said, pointing to her records. "We were discussing my daughter's dance recital at exactly 2:15 a.m. She just described our entire conversation word for word, but she was in a coma. How is that possible?" The hospital's technical team recovered data from all the medical equipment used during her 3-month stay. They analyzed every spike in brain activity, every change in vital signs, creating a detailed timeline of her physical responses. The patterns they found were fascinating. Her brain activity indeed peaked during sunset hours, just as she had described. Her father's meticulous research proved invaluable. His spreadsheets and notes provided an independent record of daily events, visitors, and conversations. The team cross-referenced his documentation with hospital records, finding match after match. "Look at this," he would say, pointing to his laptop screen. She knew about changes in her medication that were only discussed in the doctor's conference room down the hall. The cleaning staff, security guards, and cafeteria workers all became part of the investigation. They confirmed small details she had mentioned, the songs that were hummed, the conversations in the hallway, even the squeaky wheel on the food cart that passed her room every morning at 7:15. One particularly striking piece of evidence came from the hospital's security cameras. She had described watching a late-night conversation between two doctors near the nurse's station, far from her room. The security footage confirmed every detail, the time, the people involved, even the gestures she described. There was no way she could have seen this from her bed, even if she had been awake. The young patient's sister's journal became another valuable source of verification. The medical team compared the private conversations she had recorded with her sister's recollections. The matches were perfect, not just the general content, but specific words, emotions, and even the way people were sitting or standing in the room. As evidence mounted, the investigation took an unexpected turn. Other hospitals began sharing similar cases, patients who had shown unusual awareness during comas, though none as detailed or well documented as this one. A network of researchers formed, sharing data and theories, all trying to understand what this might mean for their understanding of consciousness. The neurologists spent hours reviewing brain scan data with colleagues around the world. They noticed patterns they had never seen before, suggesting levels of awareness and information processing that shouldn't have been possible in a coma state. "We need to rethink everything we know about consciousness," he told his team. "This isn't just about one patient anymore. This could change how we understand the human mind." The young patient continued to help with the investigation, patiently answering questions and providing new details. She drew diagrams showing her unique perspective of the room from above, described the patterns of hospital routine she had observed, and explained how her awareness had shifted and changed during different times of day. One afternoon, during a particularly long session of questions and verifications, she made a statement that stopped everyone in their tracks. "You know," she said, looking around at the busy research team, "all this proof you're finding, it's not just about showing that I was aware. It's about all the other patients out there right now, lying in hospital beds, aware but unable to tell anyone. We need to help them." Her words hit home. The medical team realized this investigation wasn't just about proving or disproving one person's extraordinary experience. It was about potentially revolutionizing how hospitals treat coma patients. If this level of awareness was possible, how should medical staff behave around seemingly unconscious patients? What support could they offer? How could they better monitor for signs of consciousness? As the investigation continued, it became clear that they were uncovering something that would change medical science forever. Every verified detail, every confirmed conversation, every matched record added to a growing body of evidence that suggested consciousness was far more complex than anyone had imagined. But more importantly, it offered hope. Hope for families sitting by hospital beds, hope for medical professionals treating coma patients, and hope for a deeper understanding of the human mind and spirit. 1 year after the remarkable awakening at Memorial General Hospital, the impact of that extraordinary case continued to ripple through the medical world. The young volleyball player who had changed everything stood at a podium, addressing a room full of doctors, researchers, and medical students. Her story had grown far beyond a personal journey of recovery. It had become a catalyst for change in how the world understood consciousness. When I first tried to tell people what I had experienced, she began, her voice steady and clear, I was afraid nobody would believe me. But today, we're not just believing, we're changing how we care for patients all around the world. The audience listened intently, many taking notes, others nodding in recognition of how her case had transformed their own medical practices. Back at Memorial General, the changes were already visible. Every coma patient's room now had a protocol posted on the wall, reminding medical staff to treat the patient as potentially aware and conscious. Nurses spoke to their patients constantly, explaining procedures and providing updates. Families were encouraged to maintain regular conversation and interaction, just as her family had done. The lead neurologist who had followed her case from the beginning had developed new guidelines for monitoring brain activity. We look for patterns now that we would have missed before, he explained to a group of medical residents. Those sunset spikes we saw in her case? We've found similar patterns in other patients. We're getting better at recognizing signs of consciousness that we used to overlook. Her father's detailed research had led to the creation of a new family observation protocol. Hospitals around the country were now providing families with tablets and apps to track and record their observations of coma patients. Sometimes families notice things that medical instruments miss. He would explain at medical conferences, showing his original spreadsheets that had helped verify his daughter's experiences. The young patient's sister had turned her bedside journal into a template for other families. Writing everything down helped us cope, she told support groups. But more importantly, it created a record that helped prove my sister's experiences were real. Now other families can do the same thing. Her journal format was being used in hospitals across the country, helping families maintain hope and potentially valuable information. Research projects sparked by her case were yielding fascinating results. Scientists were discovering new levels of brain activity in coma patients, developing better monitoring techniques, and creating more sophisticated ways to detect consciousness. Some patients were even learning to communicate through controlled brain activity, similar to the patterns she had shown during sunset hours. The mother, who had spent countless hours talking to her daughter during the coma, now helped train hospital staff and families. Never assume they can't hear you, she would say during her workshops. Talk to them, share with them, let them know they're not alone. We now know they might be more aware than we ever imagined. The medical community's understanding of consciousness had expanded dramatically. What was once seen as a simple binary state, conscious or unconscious, was now recognized as a complex spectrum. Hospitals were implementing new care protocols, treating all patients, regardless of their apparent state of consciousness, with the assumption that they might be aware and processing information. The young patient herself had become an advocate for coma patient care, traveling to hospitals and medical conferences to share her story. Every detail matters, she would tell medical staff. That squeaky door that annoyed you? Your patient might be hearing it. Those private conversations in the hallway? They might be listening. The kind words you say when you think no one can hear. They might be treasuring everyone. Her case had also changed how hospitals approached family involvement in patient care. Instead of limiting visiting hours, many hospitals now encouraged family presence around the clock. They created comfortable spaces for families to spend time with their loved ones, understanding that this interaction might be more important than previously thought. Technology companies began developing new tools specifically designed for monitoring consciousness in coma patients. These devices, inspired by the patterns observed in her case, were more sensitive to subtle signs of awareness. Some hospitals were even experimenting with virtual reality systems that might help communicate with conscious but unresponsive patients. As she concluded her speech that day, she shared a moment that had stayed with her throughout her journey. "During my coma, I heard a young nurse tell my mother something that I'll never forget. She said, 'Just because we can't see it doesn't mean it's not there.' At the time, she was talking about hope, but now we know she was talking about consciousness itself." The audience rose in a standing ovation, but this wasn't just applause for a good speech. It was recognition of a journey that had transformed medical science, a story that had given hope to countless families, and a revelation that had forever changed our understanding of human consciousness. As she left the stage, she knew that her experience would continue to inspire new discoveries and better care for patients for years to come.